Roy Patterson, Interim COO, Transition Operations, Titan Corporation. I slid that business card across the conference table like I was dealing the winning hand in a poker game I'd been playing for 15 years. The kid's face went white as fresh snow. 20 minutes earlier, Chelsea Morrison had fired me in front of 6 executives from our buyer. Now she was staring at my new title like someone had just told her Santa Claus was real and royally pissed off. But let me back up and tell you how a 52-year-old Army Rangers vet ended up outflanking a trust fund baby in corporate warfare. The name's Roy Patterson. Friends call me Pat. Picked that up during my Rangers days back when I thought hard work and showing up on time actually mattered in business. Turns out it does matter, just not the way I thought it would. In the Rangers, we had a saying, proper planning prevents piss-poor performance. Corporate America needed that lesson. I've been at Steel Core Industries for 15 years. Started as operations manager when we had 35 people working out of a converted warehouse in Detroit. Built every system that made this company worth $850 million to Titan Corporation. Every supplier contract, every EPA compliance protocol, every safety procedure that kept us alive when things went sideways. That's what Rangers do. We secure the objective and hold the line. Then our CEO decided to retire. No warning, no transition plan, just a goodbye email on Friday and an empty corner office on Monday. In the military, we call that abandoning your post. That's when Chelsea showed up. Kid's 28 years old, CEO's niece, has an MBA from Stanford and exactly 0 days of real-world experience. First thing she did was order new business cards with Chief Executive Officer in gold lettering and start a company Instagram account. I should have known right then we were in for a goat rope. Chelsea called an all-hands meeting her first day, walked in wearing a blazer that cost more than my truck payment, and opened with this gem. We're going to disrupt some paradigms, people. I looked around the room. Our head of finance was 45 years old with twin boys heading to college. Our safety director had been running steel plants since before Chelsea learned to drive. These weren't people who needed their paradigms disrupted. They needed steady leadership and clear direction. They needed someone who understood the mission. But Chelsea had other ideas. See, there's a difference between leading and performing. I learned that in the Rangers. Real leadership happens in the details nobody wants to handle. The EPA reports that keep federal regulators from shutting you down. The union negotiations that keep your workforce happy. The backup systems that save your company when everything breaks at once. That's ground truth. The reality of keeping operations running while everyone else plays politics. Chelsea's version of leadership was LinkedIn posts and buzzwords. She talked about leveraging synergies while I was fixing the equipment that actually made the synergies possible. Within a week, 3 department heads were calling me directly. Not Chelsea, me. Legal couldn't finalize our biggest contract because Chelsea claimed she had master access to our signature authority. Turns out she thought that was just a feeling, not an actual system permission. In the Rangers, we'd call that a cluster foxtrot. Everything's broken and nobody knows why. Finance couldn't get budget approvals because the kid kept replying circle back to every email like it was some magic spell that made problems disappear. Our safety director was stuck because Chelsea had streamlined our OSHA compliance process by removing the steps that actually verified we weren't killing people. Me, I kept the lights on, made the calls, fixed the problems, worked weekends to clean up the messes she created during the week. Standard operating procedure when your command structure falls apart. You hold your position and maintain mission readiness. Look, I'm 52 years old. My son's a senior studying engineering at Michigan. That's $35,000 a year. My daughter's a junior in high school. I can't just stop paying. My wife, Pat, has been patient with the long hours for 15 years because she knew I was building something real, something that would set us up for retirement. She's a nurse, knows about keeping people alive when systems fail. I wasn't about to let some kid with a business degree flush that down the toilet. In the military, you don't abandon your people or your mission. Same rules apply in civilian life. But I was getting tactical fatigue. Dead tired, not just from the work. From watching 15 years of careful planning get torn apart by someone who thought innovation meant ignoring everything that came before her. That warehouse safety system that saved us during the plant explosion in 2019, I built that. The supplier relationships that got us preferred pricing when steel costs went crazy during COVID, those were mine. The disaster recovery plan that kept us running when our main server died. I wrote that on a Sunday afternoon while Chelsea was probably posting motivational quotes on social media. So when Anthony Torres from Titan Corporation reached out asking if we had any continuity frameworks to help with the acquisition, I didn't hesitate. This was reconnaissance, gathering intel for the people who actually understood the terrain. I didn't give him corporate speak. I gave him ground truth. One document, password protected, showing exactly how Steel Core actually worked. Not how Chelsea said it worked, how it really worked. The systems that mattered, the people who knew what they were doing, the supplier relationships that kept us profitable, the compliance protocols that kept us legal. I wasn't trying to save my job. I'd already started updating my resume, but I wasn't going to let 15 years of work get destroyed by incompetence either. Rangers don't leave fellow soldiers behind, and they don't let good work get wasted because someone above them doesn't know what they're doing. Anthony responded within an hour. "This is incredibly helpful. Can I share this with Chelsea?" I wrote back. "Maybe hold off on that for now." That was the moment everything changed. Sometimes the best tactical move is to let the enemy reveal their position first. Suddenly I was getting copied on emails I wasn't supposed to see. Internal risk assessments from Titan's due diligence team. Integration timelines that mentioned my name specifically. HR forecasts that referenced key operational personnel retention. Intel was flowing my way, and in the Rangers, good intel is worth more than gold. Then Anthony sent me a direct message. "Roy, what's your assessment of the safety integration timeline under the current leadership structure?" Not ask Chelsea what she thinks. He asked me directly. That's when I knew I had established contact with friendlies behind enemy lines. Then came the legal document sent to my personal email at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday. No subject line, just a file called Steel Core Transition Staffing Internal Draft. I expected the usual corporate word salad. Instead, I found something interesting. Under Key Personnel Transition Phase, there was a line item for Continuity Lead. The name field was blank, like a job posting nobody had filled yet. I saved that email in a folder I called Operational Orders because sometimes corporate wars aren't won in boardrooms. They're won in footnotes and organizational charts that nobody reads until it's too late. That's basic reconnaissance. Document everything. Trust nothing until verified. Meanwhile, Chelsea was busy playing CEO. She brought in her sorority sister Brittany Walsh as Chief Innovation Officer. That's not a real job title. That's what you call someone when you want to pay your friend but can't think of actual work for her to do. In the military, we call that nepotism, and it gets people killed. Brittany showed up with a standing desk, a ring light for video calls, and a whiteboard covered in words like disruptive and scalable. She'd never worked anywhere else. Her entire business experience was helping Chelsea run their sorority's fundraiser budget. I'd seen this before. Put unqualified personnel in critical positions and watch the whole operation fall apart. Within days, everything started falling apart. Our supplier payment system crashed because Brittany optimized the approval workflow. She removed 2 verification steps that existed because of federal compliance requirements. Not because they were inefficient, because they were legally required. Classic rookie mistake. Changing systems you don't understand. One of our biggest steel suppliers drove to our office and threatened to repossess equipment. They'd been waiting 3 weeks for a payment that was stuck in Brittany's improved system. In the Rangers, when your supply lines get cut, you've got maybe 72 hours before mission failure. I found Chelsea in the break room laughing with Brittany over protein bars while our entire supply chain was about to collapse. Time for a direct approach. "We've got a serious problem with supplier payments," I told her. She held up her hand like a traffic cop. "Roy, maybe if you focused less on problems and more on solutions, we wouldn't be having this conversation. You handle operations. Let strategy handle the big picture. Just operations. Never mind that I was the one who negotiated the contracts that kept our costs down. Never mind that I'd already handled 5 emergency supplier calls that morning while Brittany was taking selfies with her whiteboard." In the military, you learn to recognize when someone's giving you orders they can't back up. That's when I shifted tactics. Stopped talking in meetings. Mostly because I wasn't invited anymore. Chelsea had decided I was resistant to change and started excluding me from strategic discussions. Fine by me. Sometimes the best way to win is to let the enemy think they've already won. I stopped offering solutions, stopped volunteering to fix problems before they became disasters. I just watched, documented everything, and quietly started preparing for what I knew was coming. Because in my experience, incompetent leadership always creates its own downfall. You just have to be ready to step in when it happens. 3 weeks after Chelsea took over, our biggest logistics partnership fell apart. Brittany missed a renewal deadline, not by a few days, by 3 weeks. The contract that kept our entire Midwest distribution running just expired because she thought auto-renewal meant it happened automatically without any paperwork. Our logistics partner gave us 48 hours to fix it, or they'd start moving our account to the bottom of their priority list. In supply chain terms, that's like being told your house is about to burn down and you have 2 days to find a fire department. Mission-critical failure incoming. Titan's legal team flagged it immediately. They weren't idiots. They could see our operational foundation cracking in real time. Our finance director called me in a panic. "Roy, do we have any backup logistics contacts?" Of course I did. I'd built a backup supplier list back in March, knowing we'd need it if this circus kept going. Always have contingency plans, basic military planning. I handed it over quietly. Didn't CC Chelsea, didn't make a big announcement, just gave her what she needed to keep the company from imploding. But Titan noticed. That's when Anthony reached out personally, not through official channels, just a direct message. "You okay over there? Just checking in." 7 words that changed everything. Because if Anthony was reaching out personally, that meant my silence was getting louder than Chelsea's noise. That meant I still had operational value they recognized. I wrote back, "Yeah, but you might want to look at page 12, paragraph 2C in that staffing agreement." I didn't explain what it said, didn't need to, because paragraph 2C was the part nobody reads, the legal fine print that gets buried in 85 pages of acquisition paperwork. The part that said any staffing decisions related to operational personnel had to be approved by something called a continuity lead, and that position was still vacant. Time to establish new command structure. The first unofficial briefing happened by accident, or at least that's what I told myself. We were supposed to be reviewing asset inventories with Titan's integration team, standard due diligence stuff. But Chelsea had what she called delegate fatigue, so she forwarded the meeting invite to me without reading the agenda. Perfect operational security failure on her part. Nicole Hamilton, one of Titan's senior lawyers, asked about our safety performance metrics for the past 3 years. Pretty basic question for anyone who'd actually been running operations. Chelsea stared at her like she'd been asked to explain quantum physics in French. I waited a beat, then said, "You'll find those in tab 3 of the operations dashboard. Lines 58 through 74 include recovery data for incident response protocols." Dead silence for about 5 seconds. Then Nicole said, "Perfect, thanks, Roy." After the call, I got a message from Titan's integration office. "Would you have time for a quick call about operational continuity?" That's when I knew I'd made contact with the real decision makers. Time to establish proper communications. I thought about it for exactly 30 seconds. I wasn't going to blow up NDAs or burn bridges just to play office politics. But I also wasn't going to sit there and watch 15 years of work get destroyed by incompetence. One call, 15 minutes off the official calendar. Basic operational briefing. That first call turned into 3 more by the end of the week. I didn't editorialize, didn't badmouth Chelsea or Brittany, just answered what they asked. In the Rangers, we call it just the facts, ma'am. No opinions, no spin, just ground truth. "Do you have post-acquisition risk assessments?" "Yes, I built them in Q2. "Any concerns about the safety protocol migration?" "Yes." "Here's the audit trail showing what could break. Any indication current leadership isn't aligned on Q4 deliverables?" I attached 2 different strategy documents, one from our engineering team, one from Chelsea's fantasy world. I never said I told you so. The documentation spoke for itself. That's how you build credibility. Let the evidence do the talking. By the 3rd call, the tone changed completely. Nicole brought Anthony. Anthony brought another executive. Then their legal counsel joined. They stopped calling it a chat, started calling it a transition review. The cavalry was forming up. That's when Anthony asked the question that changed my life. "Roy, if there were an ideal role for you post-acquisition to maintain operational continuity, what would that look like?" I didn't hesitate. Interim COO for transition operations. Not permanent, not glamorous, just honest. I didn't want a corner office or a fancy title. I wanted control over the bridge until we got through the storm. Mission-focused leadership. Anthony nodded and typed something I couldn't see. 2 days later, a Titan lawyer sent me a document labeled Transition Staffing Notes, Internal Review Only. I read it twice, then a third time. My name was there in the continuity lead slot with a checkbox next to it. Checked. The pieces were falling into place. Meanwhile, Chelsea was hosting Innovation Fridays with beanbag chairs and kombucha. She asked the finance team why cash flow couldn't just mean selling more stuff. She suggested we disrupt our EPA compliance protocols because they were slowing down our velocity. Complete disconnection from operational reality. She had no clue about the calls, no idea about the documents, no clue that the acquisition agreement she'd signed in blind faith was about to execute a change of command. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning. Chelsea posted a company-wide message on Slack. Huge win. We've migrated all compliance workflows to a new cloud-based solution. Faster, cheaper, better. I read it 3 times just to make sure she'd actually written migrated all compliance workflows about systems that handled legal documents for an $850 million acquisition. That's what we call a career-limiting move in the military. My phone started ringing within an hour. Legal couldn't access contract databases. Safety management was locked out of inspection workflows. Procurement was stuck talking to a chatbot that answered every question with "I'm still learning." 5 critical suppliers were frozen in the new system. No tax documentation, no background checks, no payment authorization. One of them threatened to involve their legal team if the issue wasn't resolved by end of business. When your supply lines are cut and your suppliers are talking lawyers, you're looking at mission failure. I found Chelsea in the break room hosting something called Transformation Tuesday. She was drinking cucumber water and drawing flowcharts on butcher paper while the company burned down around her. "We've got a serious problem," I told her. "The compliance migration broke everything." She looked up from her flowchart and grinned like someone who'd just parallel parked a school bus. "Minor hiccup, Roy." "Growing pains." The sales rep said their AI platform scales with organizational needs. "Their AI doesn't file EPA reports, Chelsea." She blinked like I just made up the term EPA on the spot. Complete loss of situational awareness. Anthony from Titan was on an emergency call within 2 hours. He didn't yell, didn't even sound annoyed, just asked one simple question. Who authorized the system migration? Chelsea opened her mouth to answer, but I held up my hand. "I'll send you a complete breakdown. Decision logs, approval chains, timeline documentation. Time to deliver the after-action report that would end this operation." I had everything. Screenshots of Slack conversations where Chelsea told Brittany to just rip the Band-Aid off. Email threads where department heads asked for more time to review the migration plan. Meeting notes where I'd specifically warned about compliance risks. Complete documentation package, ready for deployment. I sent it all to Anthony in one clean package. Time-stamped, documented, objective. No editorializing needed. The facts spoke for themselves. That's how you conduct a proper debrief. Then Chelsea tried to spin it. She told Titan's team that I'd been resistant to innovation, that I'd created gaps in the legacy system, that she was future-proofing operations, and I just couldn't adapt to modern business practices. What she didn't know was that I documented those conversations too. When Anthony got my second email package, he replied with one word: received. 2 days of radio silence. Then something interesting happened. I wasn't officially invited to Titan's internal integration planning meeting, but when the meeting notes got distributed, my name was all over them. Supplier impact assessment, Roy P. to provide timeline. System restoration roadmap, Roy engineering analysis. Compliance review, reference Roy's audit documentation. Chelsea wasn't mentioned once. The command structure was already shifting and she didn't even know it. The contract sat in my personal email for 2 weeks. Subject line, Steel Corps Transition Staffing Agreement, Final Draft. I didn't open it right away. Not because I was scared of what was in it, because I already knew what wasn't in it. Chelsea never mentioned getting this document. Probably assumed it was just legal paperwork that lawyers would handle. She didn't understand that the most dangerous orders in corporate America aren't shouted in boardrooms. They're buried in paragraph 2C of page 12, where nobody bothers to read. Rangers always read the fine print. Your life depends on understanding your operational parameters. Page 12, paragraph 2C. All staffing decisions related to transition phase operational personnel must receive final approval from the designated continuity lead, whose authority may not be overridden by temporary or interim executives not ratified by the acquiring company's board of directors. One more line. Continuity lead, Roy Patterson. They'd buried a tactical nuke in the contract. Chelsea had signed it thinking it was a formality. She'd authorized a document that handed me more operational authority than she had. The buyers had done it deliberately, quietly, legally. Mission parameters established. The morning before our final acquisition meeting, Chelsea sent another company-wide email. Subject, the future starts tomorrow. Steel Core joins Titan. 5 paragraphs about transformational synergies and next-level operational excellence. I read the words operational excellence and almost laughed out loud. This was a kid who'd asked me last week if gross margin meant we were being rude to customers. That evening, I got a message from Anthony Torres himself. Bring your business cards tomorrow. 5 words that confirm the operational plan. Time to execute. The final meeting was set for 10 a.m. in the main conference room. Pure corporate theater. Mahogany table, leather chairs, windows overlooking the parking lot where I'd been arriving at 7 a.m. for 15 years. Titan's entire team was there. Anthony Torres at the head of the table, Nicole Hamilton and her legal team flanking him like a proper command structure. On our side, Chelsea, Brittany, our HR director, and me, positioned for optimal observation. Anthony opened with standard military efficiency. Let's review the transition timeline and key personnel assignments. Chelsea jumped in like she was hosting a game show. Absolutely. We're excited, we're aligned, and we're ready to hit the ground running. She clicked to her organizational chart with her name at the top and everyone else reporting to her, including a box labeled Outgoing Personnel with my name in it. I want to personally thank Roy Patterson, who will be transitioning out over the next 2 weeks to make room for our new operational structure. There it was. Public execution attempt. Said like she was doing me a favor. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out one business card. Matte black cardstock, white ink, clean professional font. Roy Patterson, Interim COO, Transition Operations, Titan Corporation. I slid it across the table to Anthony Torres without saying a word. Mission executed. He picked it up, read it. Then came laughter. Not mean laughter. Delighted laughter. Like someone had just been handed the punchline to a joke they'd been waiting months to hear. Chelsea's smile faltered. Something funny? Anthony passed the card to Nicole, who read it and grinned like Christmas morning. Then Nicole opened her folder to page 12, yellow sticky tab visible. Actually, Miss Morrison, Roy represents transition leadership for Steel Core's operational integration. That authority was established in the staffing agreement you signed 3 weeks ago. Chelsea's face went white. There's no way that's legally binding. Anthony slid the contract across the table. Page 12, paragraph 2C. Roy Patterson, designated continuity lead, final authority over all staffing decisions related to operational personnel during the transition period. Your signature's right there on page 17. The room went dead quiet. Chelsea stared at the document like it was written in a foreign language, which, in a way, it was. The foreign language of actually reading what you sign. But he reports to me, she said finally. Anthony smiled like a chess master delivering checkmate. Not anymore. Nicole read from the contract. All transition, staffing, and operational decisions fall under the final authority of the designated continuity lead, Roy Patterson. Chelsea didn't sit down, didn't storm out, just stood there like someone had unplugged her from the wall. About that transition, Chelsea, we're making some adjustments to your role. Nicole pulled out another folder. Effective immediately, you'll be reassigned to quality assurance at our Phoenix facility. Day shift manufacturing operations. Same pay grade. That was the tactical beauty of it. They weren't firing her. They were giving her exactly what she'd tried to give me. A new assignment, whether she wanted it or not. Nicole handed me an envelope. Thick cardstock, Titan letterhead. Inside, my official appointment letter. Interim COO, Transition Operations. 90-day term with possibility of extension. Salary bump that would cover my kids' college tuition without me having to work weekends for the next 2 years. Thank you, I said. First words I'd spoken since sliding my business card across the table, looking forward to getting started. I stood up and shook hands with Anthony, Nicole, and the rest of the team. Professional, courteous, like this was just another successful mission completion. Behind me I heard Chelsea's voice one more time, soft and broken. Roy, you knew about this the whole time, didn't you? I turned around. Kid was still standing there holding her reassignment letter like a court summons. I knew you were in over your head, I said. I tried to help. You told me to stay in my lane, but you planned this. You set me up. I thought about that for a second. No, Chelsea. I just did my job. You signed a contract without reading it. I read everything. That's the difference between us. She looked like she wanted to say something else. Instead, she just stood there while everyone else filed out of the room. 3 hours later, Pat called to ask how the meeting went. Good, I told her. Really good. How does dinner at that steakhouse sound tonight? Can we afford it? Yeah, I said, looking at my new Titan badge. We can afford it. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Chelsea. This is Chelsea. I start in Phoenix next week. I wanted to say, I think I understand now what you were trying to tell me. I showed the message to Pat. She read it and looked at me. You going to respond? I thought about it. Kid was 28 years old. She just learned the hardest lesson in business. Authority without competence is just noise. I typed back, good luck. Keep your head down and learn the operations. You might surprise yourself. She wrote back immediately. Thanks. 6 months later, Anthony called. Titan wanted to make my interim position permanent. Full COO role, stock options, the works. I said yes. Sometimes the system works. Sometimes experience beats connections and competence trumps politics. Sometimes the guy who actually knows how to run the machine gets to run the machine. The Army taught me that real victories aren't about glory. They're about completing the mission. And my mission was keeping the lights on while everyone else figured out who was really in charge. Turns out it was me all along. I just had to wait for everyone else to figure it out. You're cutting my salary to $42,000. That's what I said. Loud enough for everyone in that Austin conference room to hear. Garrett Sullivan didn't even blink, just sat there like some corporate king, watching me process the number that had just blown up my life. My name's Nathan Pierce. I'm 47 years old, married to Sarah, got 2 kids, and until that moment, I was making $110,000 a year as senior materials engineer at Titanium Dynamics Corporation. 7 years I'd been there. 7 years of 60-hour weeks, breakthrough innovations, and making that company serious money. $110,000 down to $42,000. That wasn't a pay cut. That was execution by spreadsheet. It's company-wide restructuring, Nathan, Garrett said in that smooth voice of his. Nothing personal. Nothing personal. Right. That's why I was the only senior engineer getting financially waterboarded while his 24-year-old niece Ashley just got promoted to department supervisor with 0 qualifications. That's why my 401k contributions got frozen last month. That's why my health insurance premiums just doubled. The paper sat in front of me like a death warrant. Organizational restructuring, it said at the top, with my name typed neatly below in Times New Roman. I didn't grab it, just stared at it while some suit from corporate finance, never bothered learning his name, started talking about market pressures and realigning resources with revenue streams. Translation, we're bleeding money and someone has to pay for it. That someone was me. The thing is, I'd seen this coming for months. Budget meetings I wasn't invited to anymore, projects getting reassigned without explanation, equipment orders that never got approved, my research assistants being temporarily moved to other departments. But the real giveaway was 3 weeks ago when I caught Garrett and his VP Bradley Walsh huddled over printouts of my lab notes in the break room. They scattered like roaches when they saw me. They were planning to push me out and keep my work. That was their first mistake. Here's what Garrett didn't know. For the past 3 years, I'd been working nights and weekends in my garage, developing something that would change everything. Not using company time, not using company resources, my own equipment, my own materials, my own sweat and 401k money that I'd borrowed against. I'd solved a problem that had stumped aerospace engineers for decades: how to create titanium polymer composite coatings that could cure at sub-zero temperatures without losing structural integrity. Every major manufacturer, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, had been trying to crack this for years. The market was worth $180 million annually in aerospace applications alone, with automotive and defense adding another $120 million. I'd done it. Patent applications filed 6 months ago. US 10,000 to 34,567 for the primary coating system. US 10,234,568 for the curing catalyst, US 10,234,569 for the application process. All mine, all documented, all bulletproof. My garage lab wasn't much to look at from the outside, but inside I had $75,000 worth of equipment I'd bought piece by piece over 3 years. A Shimadzu DSC-60 differential scanning calorimeter I got at an equipment auction for $8,000. An Instron 5565 universal testing machine that cost me $15,000 used. Temperature-controlled curing chambers I built myself using industrial heating elements and PID controllers. Every night after Sarah and the kids went to bed, I'd work until 2 a.m. Every weekend I'd spend 8 to 10 hours in that garage. Sarah thought I was just tinkering with electronics. She had no idea I was developing technology that would revolutionize an entire industry. The breakthrough happened on a Tuesday night in February. I'd been trying to solve the polymer cross-linking problem at low temperatures. Most aerospace adhesives need heat to cure properly, usually 180–220 degrees. That's fine in a factory, but useless if you're trying to repair a wind turbine in Montana winter or fix a pipeline in Alaska. I was working with a modified epoxy resin system, trying different catalyst combinations. Around midnight, I accidentally knocked over a beaker of experimental solvent into a batch of titanium-enhanced polymer I'd been testing. Instead of ruining the mixture, it created something entirely new. A gel that stayed workable at 40 degrees, but formed molecular bonds stronger than traditional composites at room temperature. I spent the next 4 months refining the formula. The final version had tensile strength of 85,000 psi, compared to 45,000 psi for standard aerospace adhesives. Cure time at 40 degrees F was just 45 minutes versus 6 to 8 hours for heat-cured systems. The cost per pound was actually 15% lower than existing solutions. "Let me think about it," I said, pushing back from the conference table. Garrett's eyebrows went up. "This isn't really a negotiation, Nathan." I stood up, grabbed my jacket. The room went dead quiet. You could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead. "Where are you going?" he called after me. I stopped at the door and looked back at him. "To think about whether I want to work for 38% of what I'm worth or find somewhere that appreciates what I bring to the table." That was the last lie I told him. I already knew exactly what I was going to do. I drove home to our house in Cedar Park, $425,000 mortgage that this salary cut would absolutely destroy. The monthly payment was $2,800. On $42,000 a year after taxes, I'd be bringing home maybe $20,600 a month. Not enough to cover the mortgage, let alone utilities, food, car payments, and Nathan Jr.'s college fund that we'd been building for his sophomore year at UT. Sarah was in her home office doing quarterly taxes for her clients when I walked in. She took one look at my face and set down her calculator. "How bad?" $42,000. She was quiet for a moment, running numbers in her head. Sarah's a CPA, so she immediately understood what this meant for our finances. "That doesn't even cover the mortgage." "I know." I pulled out my phone and called Michael Torres, the patent attorney I'd been working with. "Michael, it's Nathan. We need to file everything today." "Today? The full filing fees are going to be $45,000 for all 3 patents." "I know. Do it." After I hung up, Sarah stared at me. "What patents?" That's when I told her everything. The garage lab, 3 years of secret research, the breakthrough that would revolutionize aerospace manufacturing. Sarah listened to everything without saying a word, her accountant brain processing the implications. "You've been working on this for 3 years and didn't tell me?" I wanted to be sure it worked first, and I needed to protect us. I could see what was coming at Titanium Dynamics 6 months ago when they started the budget freezes. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the patent filing receipts I'd kept in our home safe. "How much are we talking about? Realistically?" I pulled out the market analysis I'd done with Michael Torres. The aerospace coating market is $180 million annually. Automotive and defense add another $120 million. Conservative estimates show my technology could capture 15% market share within 2 years. That's $45 million in total sales. And your cut? Standard licensing deals are 8–12% royalties. I'm targeting 10%, so $4.5 million annually once we hit full market penetration. Sarah set down the papers. "Nathan, that's life-changing money. Enough to pay off the house, fund both kids' college, and retire comfortably by 55. The next morning, I called in sick to Titanium Dynamics. Instead, I drove to Michael Torres's office in downtown Austin. His firm, Torres and Associates, specialized in intellectual property litigation for tech companies. "The patents are solid," Michael said, reviewing the technical documentation I'd provided. "Your garage lab documentation is meticulous. Purchase receipts for every piece of equipment, time-stamped video of major experiments, detailed lab notes with dates and signatures. What about Titanium trying to claim ownership? They'd need to prove you used company resources or developed the technology during work hours. From what I see here, you've got ironclad evidence that everything was done independently." Michael spread out 3 licensing term sheets he'd prepared. "I've drafted preliminary agreements for non-exclusive licensing. The beauty of non-exclusive deals is you can license to multiple companies simultaneously. More competition drives higher royalties. What companies are you thinking? Apex Materials is the obvious first choice. They supply Boeing and Lockheed. Precision Aerospace handles Northrop Grumman contracts. Advanced Composites Group focuses on automotive applications. All 3 would pay premium rates for this technology." I studied the numbers. Apex Materials projected $25 million in annual sales using my coding system. At 10% royalties, that's $2.5 million per year from them alone. Precision Aerospace estimated $15 million annually, another $1.5 million. Advanced Composites was more conservative at $8 million sales, but that still meant $800,000 in royalties. Total projected annual income, $4.8 million. When can we start approaching them? Patent protection is officially active as of this morning. We can begin licensing negotiations immediately. That afternoon, I walked back into Titanium Dynamics with a manila envelope and a plan that had been 3 years in the making. Garrett had called a follow-up meeting to discuss my future with the company. Smaller conference room this time, just him, Ashley Sullivan, and some HR woman whose name I'd never bothered learning. "Nathan, thanks for coming in," Garrett said as I sat down. "Have you had time to consider our restructuring offer?" "I have. And I've got a counter-proposal." I placed the envelope on the table and spread out 3 patent certificates like I was dealing cards in Vegas. Patent US 10 234,567, titanium enhanced polymer coating system for sub-zero temperature applications. Patent US 234,568, catalytic curing agent for low temperature composite bonding. Patent US 234,569, application method for aerospace-grade adhesive systems. Licensing agreements for proprietary technology I developed independently. The cold cure coating system alone is projected to generate $45 million in annual market revenue. Garrett picked up the first patent certificate. His face went pale as he read the technical specifications and filing dates. "You can't do this. These had to be developed using company knowledge, company resources." "Actually, no." I smiled and pulled out a thick folder of documentation. Every single test was conducted in my personal laboratory using equipment I purchased myself. All development happened outside work hours. I've got video documentation going back 3 years, purchase receipts for $75,000 worth of equipment, and time-stamped lab notes proving independent development. Ashley grabbed the second patent. "This is the sub-zero bonding compound. We've been trying to develop this exact technology for 7 years. I know. I was on that team for 5 of those years. Using your equipment and your timeline, we achieved exactly 0 breakthroughs. Turns out the solution required a completely different approach, one that needed working outside your budget committees and approval processes." The HR woman looked confused. "Are you offering to license these patents to Titanium Dynamics?" "Exclusive licensing rights for all 3 patents, $150,000 per month per patent. That's $450,000 monthly, paid on the 1st of each month. Starting immediately." The silence lasted about 15 seconds. I could hear someone's phone buzzing in the hallway. That's $5.4 million a year, Garrett finally said. "Correct. And a bargain compared to what these technologies will generate in the marketplace. My market analysis shows total addressable market of $300 million annually. These patents will capture at least 15% of that within 2 years. Ashley was working her jaw like she was chewing invisible gum. "We can't authorize that kind of expenditure without board approval." "Then get board approval." I'll give you 48 hours to decide. We need to review the technical specifications first, verify the effectiveness of these formulations. No, I said, gathering up the patents. You need to agree to licensing terms first. Technical review happens after you sign the agreement, not before. If you want to run independent verification tests, you can purchase sample materials at market rates once the licensing deal is active. Garrett looked like I'd grown a second head. Nathan, be reasonable. We can't write you a check for $450,000 based on patent certificates we haven't even tested. I stood up and tucked the envelope under my arm. Then I guess we don't have a deal. Wait, the HR woman said. What about your position here, the salary adjustment we discussed? I looked at her like she'd asked me to explain quantum physics to a goldfish. My position here? As of right now, I'm giving my 2 weeks' notice. My last day will be Friday, March 15th. You can't just quit, Ashley said. You have ongoing projects, responsibilities to the team. Actually, I can just quit. Texas is an at-will employment state, and as for my responsibilities, you just told me my work was worth $42,000 a year. I'm sure you can find someone at that salary level to handle whatever's left. I walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back. Oh, and one more thing. I've already been contacted by Apex Materials. They're very interested in my background with advanced composite systems. That wasn't entirely true yet, but it would be by tomorrow morning. Garrett's face went red. Apex is our biggest competitor. Your non-compete clause doesn't apply to independent licensing arrangements. I won't be their employee. I'll be licensing proprietary technology I own. Completely different legal framework. I left them sitting there looking like they'd been hit by a freight train. That afternoon, I made 3 phone calls that would change everything. First call, Robert Hayes, VP of Advanced Materials at Apex Materials. Mr. Hayes, this is Nathan Pierce. I'm a materials engineer with proprietary titanium polymer coating technology that might interest your Boeing contracts. What kind of technology? Sub-zero curing composite systems that maintain 85,000 psi tensile strength at 40 degrees F. Patent protected as of yesterday. The line went quiet for 5 seconds. That's, Mr. Pierce, if that's accurate, you're describing the holy grail of aerospace manufacturing. Boeing has been trying to solve low-temperature curing for a decade. I can arrange a demonstration. Are you available tomorrow afternoon? He was. Second call, Patricia Walsh at Precision Aerospace. Same pitch, same shocked response. Lockheed Martin had a standing $50 million contract waiting for exactly this technology. Third call, Tom Rodriguez at Advanced Composites Group. They supplied Ford and GM's lightweight vehicle programs. Automotive applications could be worth $25 million annually. By 5 p.m., I had 3 demonstration meetings scheduled for the rest of the week. I spent that evening preparing sample kits in my garage lab, small test batches that would prove the technology worked without revealing the underlying formulations. Each sample went into labeled vials with basic performance specifications but no chemical composition data. Sarah watched me work, still processing everything that had happened. You really think they'll pay those kinds of licensing fees? They'll pay more than I'm asking. This technology solves problems that have cost the aerospace industry millions in delays and failed projects. Boeing alone spends $15 million annually on temperature-controlled curing facilities that my system makes obsolete. Wednesday afternoon, I drove to Apex Materials headquarters in Round Rock with a cooler full of samples and 3 years of confidence. Robert Hayes met me in their main conference room along with 2 engineers whose names I immediately forgot and their VP of Operations, Lisa Park. Before we start, I said, setting the cooler on the table, everything you're about to see is proprietary and patent protected. I'll need signed NDAs from everyone in the room. They signed without argument. The demonstration took 2 hours. I showed them how my cold cure adhesive maintained structural integrity at temperatures that turned conventional composites into useless putty, how tensile strength actually increased in sub-zero conditions, how cure time dropped from 6 hours to 45 minutes at 40 degrees F. By the time I finished, Robert was leaning forward with his elbows on the table, staring at test samples that had just redefined what was possible in his industry. "This is revolutionary," he said. "How did you develop these formulations?" 3 years of independent research conducted entirely outside my previous employment, fully documented and legally protected. Previous employment? Titanium Dynamics, as of last week. Lisa looked up from the sample she'd been examining. Titanium has been trying to crack sub-zero bonding for years. You're telling me you solved it working alone? I'm telling you their approach was fundamentally flawed. They were trying to modify existing polymer chains instead of developing new catalytic systems. Sometimes you need to start from scratch instead of iterating on failure. Robert nodded. What are you looking for? Employment, partnership, licensing? Non-exclusive licensing rights. You manufacture and distribute under my patents. I retain ownership and collect royalties on everything sold. What kind of royalties? 10% of gross revenue for the primary coating system, 8% for the catalyst technology, 6% for the application process. Robert didn't flinch. We'd need to verify these formulations at production scale, run our own testing protocols. I'd provide technical support during the scaling process. I'll be available for ongoing development and improvements. We talked for another hour about production timelines, market analysis, and competitive positioning. By the time I left, Robert had promised to present my proposal to Apex's executive committee within 48 hours. Thursday brought similar meetings with Precision Aerospace and Advanced Composites Group. Both companies were interested. Both wanted licensing deals. Both were willing to pay premium rates for technology that could give them decisive competitive advantages. But Thursday also brought a phone call I'd been expecting. Nathan, this is Michael Torres. Titanium Dynamics filed a lawsuit this morning. They're claiming ownership of your patents based on intellectual property clauses in your employment contract. I was in my garage lab running quality tests on production samples. Do they have a case? Not based on your documentation, but they're alleging you used company resources and company time to develop the technology. They want an emergency injunction to stop you from licensing while the case is pending. How long does that usually take? Emergency hearings can happen within days. But Nathan, they filed this as a trade secret misappropriation claim. That's serious. If they can prove their allegations, you could face criminal charges. I set down the polymer sample I'd been testing. What do they need to prove? Evidence that you used titanium equipment, materials, or work time. Email records showing research on company systems. Witness testimony from colleagues who observed you working on related projects during business hours. They're not going to find any of that. How can you be certain? Because I've been planning for this possibility for 3 years. Every material purchase has a receipt with my personal credit card. Every piece of equipment in my lab has dated invoices. Every test was conducted after hours and weekends. I've got security camera footage from my neighborhood showing me working in the garage at all hours. What about your work at Titanium? Any overlap with your patents? Different projects entirely. At Titanium, I was working on heat-resistant compounds for high-temperature applications. My patents involve low-temperature curing systems. Completely different chemical principles, different applications, different market segments. Michael was quiet for a moment. They might try to argue that your work at Titanium gave you foundational knowledge essential to developing the patents. Let them try. General chemistry knowledge isn't proprietary. They'd have to prove I learned something specific at Titanium that was essential to developing the cold cure system. My lab notes show I solved the low-temperature problem using principles I learned in graduate school 15 years ago. The lawsuit was served that afternoon. Titanium Dynamics versus Nathan Pierce, alleging theft of trade secrets, breach of employment contract, and unfair competition. They wanted monetary damages, transfer of patent, ownership, and an emergency injunction preventing me from licensing the technology to anyone. I read through the 47-page complaint that evening, highlighting key allegations. Most of it was legal boilerplate, but several sections caught my attention. Plaintiff alleges that defendant utilized proprietary knowledge and trade secrets obtained during 7 years of employment to develop competing products in violation of confidentiality and intellectual property agreements. Defendant's patents incorporate foundational research conducted during work hours using company facilities and resources. Defendant's actions constitute willful misappropriation of trade secrets and tortious interference with prospective business relationships. It was all speculation and legal intimidation. They didn't have actual evidence because there wasn't any evidence to find. But the lawsuit served another purpose. It sent a signal to Apex, Precision, and Advanced Composites that my patents might not be legally secure. That was a problem I needed to solve quickly. Friday morning, I called an emergency meeting with all 3 licensing prospects. We met at a conference room I rented at a downtown Austin hotel. Robert Hayes represented Apex. Patricia Walsh handled Precision Aerospace. Advanced Composites sent Tom Rodriguez and their chief counsel. I'm sure you've all heard about the lawsuit, I said without preamble. I wanted to address this directly rather than let rumors derail our negotiations. Robert spoke first. Our legal team reviewed the complaint. Titanium's claims look like fishing expedition tactics. They are, I said, pulling out my laptop. Let me show you exactly why their case is going nowhere. The next hour was the most important presentation of my career. I walked them through every aspect of my patent development. Purchase receipts for the $75,000 in garage equipment, video timestamps showing after-hours work sessions, chemical analysis proving my compounds used completely different base materials than anything Titanium had researched. I showed them the fundamental differences between my cold cure technology and the heat-based systems Titanium had been trying to develop. Different catalysts, different polymer chains, different curing mechanisms. The only similarity was that both involved adhesives. My breakthrough came from applying organometallic chemistry principles I learned in graduate school, I explained. Titanium was stuck using traditional epoxy modification approaches. They never explored metallocene catalyst systems. By the time I finished, all three companies looked satisfied. Patricia actually smiled. This documentation is bulletproof. Our attorneys will have no problem defending these licensing agreements. Tom nodded. What's our timeline for production, assuming the legal issues resolve quickly? Scaling tests can begin immediately. Full production capacity within 90 days once you sign licensing agreements. All three companies signed preliminary agreements that afternoon. Non-exclusive licensing at the tiered royalty rates I'd proposed, with production beginning within 60 days. Conservative revenue projections: Apex, $2.5 million annually; Precision, $1.8 million; Advanced Composites, $1.2 million. Total projected income, $5.5 million per year. 2 weeks later, Michael called with news that made my entire month. Motion to dismiss granted. Judge threw out Titanium's complaint entirely, called it speculative allegations unsupported by credible evidence. What about our countersuit? That's moving forward beautifully. We're asking for legal fees, damages for interference with business relationships, and punitive damages for frivolous litigation. Conservative estimate, $1.8 million. That weekend, I got a call from James Morrison, who'd quit Titanium the previous week. Nathan, you need to know what's happening over there. Complete meltdown. How bad? They've got 4 teams working 16-hour shifts trying to reverse engineer your patents. Burning through materials budget like crazy. They're not even close to replicating your results. What about other projects? Dead in the water. The heat-resistant compound project failed its 8th consecutive test last week. High-pressure sealant development got canceled entirely. They're hemorrhaging money on failed research while legal fees pile up. How's morale? James laughed grimly. 8 people quit in 2 weeks. Dr. Stevens from Polymer Development, Lisa Park from Quality Control, 3 lab technicians. Word is spreading that the company won't survive past Christmas. Financial trouble? Stock price dropped 35% since your lawsuit news broke. Quarterly projections missed by $12 million. Board called an emergency meeting last Thursday. 6 months later, the Austin Business Journal ran a front-page article, Local Tech Company Files. Chapter 11 Bankruptcy. Titanium Dynamics had officially collapsed, unable to service $45 million in debt after losing their major aerospace contracts to competitors with superior technology. The article mentioned that key personnel had been hired by other companies and that patent assets were being auctioned to satisfy creditors. What it didn't mention was that I'd purchased several of those patent assets through a shell company, not anything related to my own technology, just manufacturing processes and testing protocols that might prove useful for future development. I also hired 6 former Titanium employees for my new company, Pierce Advanced Materials. James Morrison became my VP of Operations. Dr. Stevens joined as Senior Polymer Chemist. 4 lab technicians came aboard as testing specialists and quality control managers. PAM wasn't just a licensing operation. We provided full-service materials development, from initial research through prototype development to production scaling for aerospace and automotive clients. Our first major contract came from Boeing, developing next-generation versions of my cold cure coating system for the 787 Dreamliner program. Second contract, Lockheed Martin wanted specialized composites for F-35 applications. Third, Ford Motor Company needed lightweight bonding systems for their electric vehicle program. By the end of our second year, Pierce Advanced Materials employed 45 people, held 12 patents, and generated $18 million in annual revenue. My personal income from licensing royalties had reached $6.2 million annually. 3 years after that conference room confrontation, I was reviewing quarterly reports in my corner office when James knocked on my door. "Nathan, your 3 o'clock appointment is here." A young woman walked in, probably late 20s, nervous expression, carrying a folder of research notes. "Mr. Pierce, I'm Amanda Rodriguez. I'm a materials engineer at Davidson Chemical. I was hoping to discuss a situation with my employer." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "What kind of situation?" "They're trying to claim ownership of patents for work I developed independently, threatening my job if I don't sign over the rights. I heard about what happened between you and Titanium Dynamics." I smiled and opened a fresh notebook. "Tell me everything from the beginning." 20 minutes later, I was on the phone with Michael Torres, explaining Amanda's situation and asking if he'd be interested in taking another intellectual property case. "Sounds familiar," Michael said. "What kind of patents are we talking about?" "Self-healing concrete compounds using embedded crystalline structures. Could revolutionize infrastructure maintenance." "And she developed this independently? Home lab, personal materials, documented everything. Her employer found out and wants to claim ownership based on employment contract provisions. Same playbook Titanium tried with you." "Exactly. But this time we know how to shut it down before it escalates." I looked across my desk at Amanda Rodriguez, who was reviewing her documentation with the focused intensity of someone whose career hung in the balance. Some stories end. Others just keep going, rippling outward in ways you never expected. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just protecting yourself, it's building something better and helping others do the same. 5 years after Garrett Sullivan cut my salary to $42,000, Pierce Advanced Materials was valued at $85 million. We employed 120 people across 3 facilities. Our patents were licensed by companies in 18 countries. And Garrett, last I heard, he was selling industrial packaging solutions in Dallas for $58,000 a year. Sometimes justice takes time, but it always comes around. The sound a $76,000 pay cut makes when it hits the conference table is something you never forget. It's not the rustle of paper or the thud of a briefcase closing. It's the dead silence that follows when someone you trusted just financially executed you with a smile. Effective immediately, your salary is being adjusted to $42,000 annually, Ray Hutchinson said, sliding that death sentence across the polished oak like he was passing the salt. His corporate smile never wavered, not even when he watched my face process what he'd just done. "My name's Walt Patterson. I'm 52 years old, and until that moment in March 2024, I thought loyalty meant something in corporate America. 23 years of marriage to Nancy, 2 kids heading to college, and a mortgage that doesn't care about company restructuring. That's the backdrop of my life when Ray decided to destroy it. You want to know what $76,000 looks like in real terms? That's my son Mark's tuition at Michigan State for engineering. That's my daughter Sarah's pre-med dreams at University of Michigan. That's the difference between the American dream and financial disaster. And Ray just erased it with a pen stroke. I don't understand, I managed to say, my voice steady despite everything inside me screaming. My performance reviews have been excellent for 5 consecutive years. The Henderson automation project I led saved this company $400,000 last quarter alone. Ray leaned back in his leather chair, adjusting his $200 tie. This guy was 49, looked like he'd never touched a wrench in his life, and had been operations director for exactly 8 months, long enough to make his mark by destroying other people's lives. "Walt, we're implementing across-the-board cost reductions. The board demands 15% savings in operational expenses. You're fortunate we're not eliminating positions entirely." Fortunate. He cut my salary by 64% and called me fortunate. See, here's what you need to understand about corporate speak. When they say restructuring, they mean we're about to screw you. When they say cost reductions, they mean your family's financial security doesn't matter. And when they say you're fortunate, They mean they've calculated exactly how much pain you can absorb before you break. Patricia Crawford cleared her throat from the corner of the room. She was 45, HR manager, and had perfected the art of making legal threats sound like helpful advice. Walt, I'd recommend reviewing Section 12.4 of your employment agreement. Compensation terms are subject to modification based on operational requirements. I knew Section 12.4 by heart. Every employee at Precision Engineering Corp learned it the hard way. But here's what Patricia and Ray didn't know about me. I keep documentation on everything. 20 years in manufacturing engineering after 8 years in the Navy teaches you that details matter, and the devil lives in those details. What specific operational requirements justify this reduction? I asked, pulling out my phone. To record the conversation. And can you provide the metrics used to determine my salary adjustment? Ray's smile flickered for just a second. That's proprietary information. Company policy. Company policy. The universal excuse for when they can't justify screwing you over. I looked around that conference room, the same room where I'd presented cost-saving innovations for the past 6 years. The same room where my manufacturing automation process had been celebrated as revolutionary and game-changing. The same room where Ray was now telling me I wasn't worth $118,000 annually. I need to discuss this with my family, I said, standing up. When do I need to respond? The adjustment is effective immediately, Patricia said, consulting her tablet. Your next paycheck will reflect the new compensation structure. Immediately. No transition period, no discussion, no consideration for the fact that I had financial obligations based on my previous salary. Just corporate efficiency at its finest. I walked out of that building and sat in my Ford F-150 for 10 minutes, trying to process what had just happened. My phone buzzed with a text from Nancy. How was the meeting? Still think it's about the promotion? Right. I'd told her this morning that Ray wanted to discuss my career development. I'd actually thought they might be promoting me to senior manufacturing engineer. Shows you how naive a guy can be after 20 years of faithful service. The drive home to our subdivision in Warren, Michigan gave me time to think. Nancy would be waiting in the kitchen, probably with coffee ready, expecting good news. Mark would be upstairs working on his calculus homework, dreaming about his engineering degree. Sarah would be studying for her AP biology exam, focused on her medical school goals. How do you walk into that house and tell your family that everything just changed? How do you explain that the company you've given 2 decades of your life to just decided you're worth 36% of what you were worth yesterday? I pulled into our driveway and sat there for another 5 minutes, looking at the house we'd bought in 2019. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, nothing fancy, but enough space for a family. The mortgage payment was $2,800 monthly, calculated based on my $118,000 salary. Insurance, property taxes, utilities, all the fixed costs that don't care about corporate restructuring. My phone rang. Tom Rodriguez, my old Navy buddy who'd gone into patent law after his service. We'd served together on the USS Michigan back in the 90s, stayed in touch over the years through holiday cards and the occasional beer when he was in town. Walt, how's the civilian world treating you? Like a red-headed stepchild, I said. Actually, Tom, I might need some legal advice. Work problems? You could say that. They just cut my salary from $118K to $42K, effective immediately. Long pause. Tom had been practicing intellectual property law for 15 years, and he knew corporate games when he heard them. That's not a reduction, Walt. That's constructive dismissal. They're trying to force you to quit. That's what I figured. What reason did they give? Cost reductions, operational requirements, the usual corporate BS. Walt, do you have any intellectual property issues with this company? Patents, trade secrets, anything like that? I almost laughed. If Tom only knew. Funny you should ask. I might have a few cards they don't know I'm holding. We need to talk. Can you drive down to Detroit tomorrow? I'll be there. I hung up and finally walked into the house. Nancy was in the kitchen, just like I'd predicted, coffee pot ready and that expectant smile on her face. So, she said, Senior Engineer Patterson has a nice ring to it. I sat down at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd celebrated Mark's acceptance to Michigan State, where we'd helped Sarah with her college applications, where we'd planned our financial future based on the assumption that hard work and loyalty meant something. Nancy, we need to talk. The conversation with Nancy went about as well as you'd expect. 23 years of marriage teaches you to read faces, and hers cycled through confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally, that particular brand of worry that comes with financial catastrophe. "They can't just do that," she said, gripping her coffee mug like it was the only solid thing left in the world. "Can they?" "Apparently they can." I pulled out my phone and showed her the email Patricia had sent while I was driving home. Effective immediately. New salary structure, operational requirements. Nancy stared at the screen. She worked part-time as a medical office administrator, bringing in about $28,000 annually. Nice supplemental income when your husband makes $118K. Survival money when he doesn't. "Walt, our mortgage alone is $2,800 a month. That's not counting insurance, utilities, groceries, car payments. Mark's tuition is $15,000 per semester. Sarah's looking at $18,000 for her first year." I knew the numbers. Had been running them in my head since Ray dropped his bombshell. "We've got savings. About $45,000 in the emergency fund. That'll buy us some time." Time for what? To find another job that pays $118K at 52 in this economy? She wasn't wrong. The manufacturing sector in Michigan wasn't exactly booming with opportunities for guys my age. Most companies wanted young engineers they could pay half my previous salary and work 60 hours a week. Mark walked into the kitchen, backpack slung over his shoulder. Senior year, 18 years old, already accepted to Michigan State's engineering program. Kid had my aptitude for math and his mother's common sense, a dangerous combination. "What's with the serious faces?" he asked, grabbing an apple from the bowl. Nancy looked at me. We'd always been straight with our kids about family finances, taught them the value of money and hard work. No reason to start lying now. "My company reduced my salary," I said. "Significantly." "Like how significantly?" "About $76,000 worth." Mark stopped mid-bite. This kid could do math in his head faster than most people could reach for a calculator. $76,000. "Dad, that's like most of your salary." "Yeah, son, it is." "Can they do that legally?" "Apparently." Mark sat down at the table, apple forgotten. "What does this mean for college?" Here's the thing about being a